What is up, everybody? Joel Alge here, the host of the Headhunter Hideout live show, where we bring recruitment leaders and executives from around the U.S. and the globe. And today I am excited to have Thom Jennings, aka Thom Jennings, with us today. And Thom leads the executive search at a company called Selective Staffing Solutions. He's been in the industry for a while now, so I know we're going to have a lot to chat about. He believes in a lot of the same things that I do in terms of bringing the industry back to where it needs to be and changing the perception of the industry as well through good relationships and expert service. So, Thom, welcome to the show, man. Good to have you here.
It's awesome to be here. I didn't realize the intro music was just gonna really get me going. I want to jump into this broadcast with spirit fingers and that was a good time. Before he lets me into the broadcast, I'm doing the classic DJ Bob,
So I got to tell you a funny story. On one of the live shows I did, I won't say which one, but I forgot to hit live. So there's a live button you hit backstage, and I forgot to hit it. And I did all of the intro, and it wasn't until 20, 30 minutes into the interview I realized I wasn't even live. So I had to just randomly go live, and I felt really, really bad. But that intro was made by one of my friends, and he's pretty good with the video editing stuff. So he made that. So all credit to Nick if you're listening out there. But let's talk about you, man. So tell me, I think you kind of know how these shows go. I'd love to hear about how you got into recruiting, how you started, and just a little bit of your backstory as far as how you got into the industry. And before you start here, I got Matt Perkins says, "Huzzah, Matt! Always good to see you, brother." If you don't know Matt, you got to connect with Matt too, Thom. He's
all right, Matt and I are going to connect after this. Hold me accountable to that, Matt. Let's connect.
I will.
So it's the common theme, right? That nobody ever goes to school and wants to be a recruiter. I'm a broken record on that one. I think every single guest has said that. I've yet to hear somebody jump on and be like, growing up, going through high school, I was just I really want to be a headhunter. So that wasn't me either. I went to a small little SUNY school. If there's any New York State people out there, SUNY's our state school system. I started in physics and moved to public relations. So if you can imagine the entire 180 I did on that one, came out of it. I was like, I'm going to be a PR pro. I'm going to work in politics. I'm going to be a lobbyist. That ended up being a sales job for a Yellow Page company. So I actually started my career selling phone book ads way after phone books were cool. So that was my.
Dude, that sounds like a brutal job.
It was tough,
Was that door to door then? Just straight door to door, or
I mean, it was outside sales. It was just going in visiting customers. You have this phone book and you walk in and you're like, oh, your ad, it's way down here. You could have 2 pages, and it was really tough because. I mean, I'm sure we'll get into talking about you have to be passionate about what you do, right? So as a 22-year-old guy in the 2000s, being passionate and telling people oh yeah, I use the phone book every day. As a matter of fact, when I look at resumes, I don't Google anything. I flip open my Yellow Pages. So I mean, that was a tough gig to jump into. So that ended up segueing, however, because as Yellow Pages started phasing out, companies were like, all right, we're going to get into digital marketing. Google is cool. Everybody Googles everything. And I was like, yeah, Google. So I went out and started selling digital marketing and kind of paved a path through that. And I was on track. I worked for a couple big agencies. I worked for the local newspaper here. I was working for the Hearst Corporation. I thought that's where I was going. I mean, I watched that movie, The Internship. I was like, great, I'm going to go work for Google. My wife and I were going out to Silicon Valley. This is my career. And then I get an in-mail. And old colleague of mine, her name's Maggie. Maybe she'll see this. She's like, hey, we're a large recruitment firm, and we have this position in Buffalo. We're looking for a recruiter. Would you be interested? And I'm just like, why are you reaching out to me? My exact response was, I barely know what you're talking about, and I know nothing about recruitment. I'm a sales guy. I'm a digital marketing guy. Like, what's going on here? And
Perfect. That's perfect, right? No recruiting experience for recruiting. That's the way to do it.
None. I didn't even know how it worked. And she's just like, no, we just kind of like your background. You seem like an entrepreneurial spirit. We're starting a Buffalo office. They were a large agency based out of Charlotte. They were like, we don't have a recruiter in Buffalo. We got a sales guy, boots on the ground, but we need a Buffalo guy. And I was, all right. They sent me down to Charlotte, went through 3 or 4 interviews, and I was like, okay, I think I can do this. That was 4 years ago, and the rest is history. So yellow pages to recruitment. I mean, that's,
I'm sure though, with the experience with yellow pages, number one, you're doing a lot of the cold calling activity. You're doing a lot of the relationship building. So to me, it's like almost like perfect preparation for recruiting. So, okay, so you get started. What was, and you mentioned this in your profile, and I highlighted it on the post as well. One of the things you say is you're kind of like surprised at how bad the reputation is of headhunters and recruiters and kind of how they do it to themselves. So what was your kind of initial reaction to the recruiting world, and how did you make that transition from the yellow pages and that sales world to the recruiting sales world, the recruiting world in general? Tell me about that.
Yeah, so that was heartbreaking, right? It's like you get into recruiting and somebody sits you down and trains you and like, you really got to be strong on LinkedIn. And I was like, oh yeah, on LinkedIn, let's do this. And you get on, you just start seeing all these posts and just people bashing recruiters. And then, you start making phone calls and people are like, no, I'll never work with a recruiter because of something that happened to me, 3 years ago. And it's just like, it's a shot to the gut.
Yeah.
And it was weird because not having experience in the industry, I thought I was going to go into this and everybody was going to welcome me with open arms, right? Went out and sold yellow pages. Like I expected people to be like, hey, you're using dated technology, essentially. Recruiting, I was like, man, this sounds great. I'm going to help people. I'm going to find people jobs. People are going to be so excited to take my phone calls. Everybody's going to love me. And then it was like, boom, you hit this brick wall. And I think it took me a good year to like really ramp up and figure out why the heck that was happening, because it was like, oh, ghosting. And I was like, well, this is easy. I just don't ghost people. They'll like me. And it wasn't. And just getting over that stigma. I mean, that's been a mission of mine for 4 years. And it's still out there. And it's people are still have these negative views of recruiters. And we talk about this a lot, Joel, and like how do we get over this? But yeah, I remember that initial shock of just, I can't believe the reputation of this field I'm in. And it completely caught me by surprise because I truly walked into that just open arms, everybody's going to love me. And that
I'm curious too, like in the recruiting process of becoming a recruiter, did they warn you, or like was that kind of part of the interview process at all, or no?
No, I mean, definitely not part of the interview process. I remember my training and I talked to a lot of agency recruiters. I think everybody's experience is kind of the same. It's like you go in, you learn an applicant tracking system, you learn how to source. It's like, here's LinkedIn Recruiter, here's how to use job boards, here's a cold call script. And then you just hit the ground running. And I don't think anybody's ever prepared for what to expect. And sometimes, I've heard people say, well, we don't want people to go into it with a negative mindset, which I can understand on some level. But no, nobody ever warned me. I just completely caught my pants on fire.
Well, we have, Thom, you're an example of your words and actions. You've changed my perspective of recruiters for sure.
Awesome. Let me just thank you. Who is that?
Let me just go. I'll check on the app because like the privacy settings, or how do you say it? Privacy
settings. Whoever you are, thank you.
Yeah, I know, man. It's crazy. We'll see.
We'll figure it out later, even if we don't figure it out now. We'll talk.
Yeah. Okay. So that was Jesse Gajos.
Hey, Jesse.
Yeah. So
Jesse's a good guy.
Yeah, Jesse. I don't know you, but I really appreciate you with that comment as well. So that's a testament to. Yeah, that's a testament to who you are, though. That people are showing up in that way for you on someone else's live show. So it's good. So. Okay, so you get into that first agency role. You're like, okay, people hate me, and people hate recruiters. I'm curious, man, just from your own perspective, like, why do you think, obviously we know like the why with like the ghosting, just a poor service, but there's a root issue. Like, what do you think the root issue is? And like, why from your perspective in the industry for, the last 4 or 5 years, like why do you think this kind of industry bad name just keeps perpetuating itself? Like, where is that coming from?
Lack of training. Like I completely put this on agency owners, recruiting leaders. It's like, I figured out how it happened. And I think when you first start recruiting, you feel like it can never happen to you, right? Like, I can keep track of these people. Nobody's going to fall through the cracks. I can manage jobs. I can juggle 30 candidates. It's fine. Then next thing you know, you got 15, 20. I mean, I've heard people that work on 40 recs at a time, and you got 5 candidates in the mix across the board, and you're working with XYZ client here and over here. They all have demands. They're blowing up your phone. It's like, how do you manage all that? Nobody ever teaches you that. So I really feel like it's lack of training, because they say, hey, learn sourcing, learn an ATS, here's a cold call script. But it's like, how do you actually manage that whole book of business, that whole candidate roster? Nobody ever shows you that. So next thing you know, everything's falling through the cracks. You're completely overwhelmed. I don't think there's any recruiter out there, I'm sure there's one or two, but for the most part, that like these things happen because of malice. I think they happen because they really just don't know any better and don't know how to handle it or don't know what to do. I mean, Joel, you've done this before too. It's like, you think of those times when you're like, oh my gosh, I got 25 interviews going on this week. I got to prep all these people, debrief them. I got to cut these candidates off. I got to, reach back out to all these candidates. And if you don't have a system in place and actually understand how to manage that, everything will explode on you. And when that explodes here, all your candidates then turn around and have a bad perception of you, because they're the ones that didn't get the contact because you were dealing with 30 other people. And it's training. Nobody ever showed me how to do it. It took me years to sit down and be like, all right, I need systems in place to try and figure out how to manage this so that people have a positive perception of me. And it took me easily 2.5 years. Easy.
Wait, so how do you? Okay, so now you're in a role where you're leading an actual division, and are you bringing people on board then that are entry level? Like, how are you kind of combating this, and how are you putting in systems or teaching people actually how to put in systems?
Yeah, so I think it's highly personalized. What I mean by that is I don't know that you can take my system and necessarily give it to somebody else, and I'm okay with that. But I think people fundamentally need to understand that, if I'm bringing somebody on, it's like, all right, I'll train you how to source, how to work with candidates, the client end of it, because I do work a full desk. And you need to understand that it's really important that you never fall out of contact with anybody. Understand that your net worth is your net work. Stole that from you. Put all that together and find a system that works for you. Some people are more organized than me. Some people can work in ATS beautifully, use their tasks list, whatever, to make everything work comfortably for them. I have a little system that works for me. I'm a big Outlook guy, but that works for me and that may not work for somebody else. But the point is, you have to push somebody and say, listen, this is a really important part of this job, because otherwise you're going to look at yourself a year from now and be like, I just torched my reputation in this market simply by being unorganized and not knowing any better. That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I just want to go to the comments here. Matt just says, have you thought about banding together as recruiters of a certain caliber mindset into a group where you can all work together to build the image and members up, while sharing tips with each other and on the field of managing things like overflow and longevity? And then he just said to manage the image of the field. And then, for example, a simple bot that sends a template mail to the potential candidates for a position that ultimately were not chosen seems like it would go a long way. 100%, Matt. I think like I think we're going to get to this point too within the conversation, because I think in recruiting, we're especially contingent recruiting. So the world that you live in, where you're full desk, you don't get paid until you get results. I think whenever that is the environment, time compared to you're always going to do the things that end up getting you paid, or that's what the pressure on you is. So like no recruitment agency owner or no sales manager is going to say, okay, spend time with the candidates that aren't going to result in money. And so I think even the idea of having like investing in a technology to help with people who are not potential candidates, for corporate companies, it's the same thing. They're not going to invest money on that because it's not going to get an ROI, except the ROI is going to be brand awareness in the long term. But selling people on that is it's tough. Although I think now we're in the digital era where people can go to Glassdoor, they can go to LinkedIn. So if you're a recruiter that's posting, yeah, treat people awesome and love everybody, and then you got 10 candidates showing up saying, what are you talking about? You ghosted me this week. You're a liar. You can't really get away with that as much. So I'm curious in your mind, I mean, do you think that the way that we're compensated or like kind of the way that we operate is a core issue in these things in terms of people just not generally getting back to people and ghosting and that type of thing?
I think it's just people being short-sighted, right? You think about it. So it's, to that point, getting somebody to invest in, let's say, the 4 out of 5 candidates that you can get chosen. And we use this term in the industry a lot, work closest to the money. That's what we have to do. We're contingency recruiters. At the end of the day, I need to work closest to the positions that I can place. But the short-sighted mindset is not paying attention to all those other people that you're working with. And the fact that every single one of them is part of your network, it could be a potential candidate later. They know somebody. Let's think of it this way, right? It's like, okay, well, XYZ candidate didn't get selected for the job. But if they live in your market, they have family, they have friends, who knows? Maybe that position didn't work out for them today, but what about 3 months from now? Like, I can't tell you how many people I place that they weren't the winner in the first job that we worked on. And people treat that statement like it's a fantasy. Like, oh yeah, I bet you that happens all the time. It does. If you're playing the long game, it does. And yeah. I can tell you, I can go back to people and, hey, I'm looking for an attorney to the paralegal I placed, 8 months ago. Do you know anybody? Yeah, my cousin, whatever the case may be. The point is, if you leave this trail of positive interactions with everybody that you work with, you can always go back to them, which is great. 2, you can go to them for referrals. And 3, you have this positive impact in whatever sphere you're working in. If you specialize in some certain industry, if you work just in your little metro area, if you leave this trail of positive interactions, regardless of whether you're working closest to the money, eventually that will be fruitful for you. But people don't think like that. They think short term. It's, what am I going to do to place this job today? Forget today. What the hell is your career going to look like in 3 years is the mindset you should have.
Yeah, it's super smart, but I think it's hard for people who are in the leadership positions and the people who own the business. It's a big mind shift change, and it's the same with personal branding. I feel it's a very similar type of thing where I don't think personal branding and building your own brand is encouraged enough in our industry, because it's not something that an agency is going to be able to own. So if they start investing in people to build their brands, and that's a very long-term type of game, but it's the same with relationships. And it's like, obviously, if you encourage people to do that, or you start talking like that, then I think it can be risky in the short term for a lot of agency owners. So again, man, I'm curious to, you got the digital marketing background, and you also work locally as well. So what are your thoughts on kind of branding yourself as a recruiter? And I'd also be curious to hear how things have changed for you locally with the pandemic, and how you're kind of pivoting things to meet with people locally and still build those relationships locally, since your local market is one of your big core focuses.
Yeah, so building your brand is everything. I'll admit I was late to start on that. Like that didn't necessarily click with me until I had this awakening moment that said, okay, I think I like recruiting and want to stick with this. I want to do this long term, especially in my backyard. So I'm in Buffalo, New York. Buffalo, New York is a very we call it the city of good neighbors. It's noticeable that people check on me. And what I mean by that is maybe on the business development side, I'm cold contacting somebody for the first time. 8 out of 10 times I'm going to see a profile view following that. So my brand on that end means everything. To Jesse's point, jumping in, it's important to me that I'm practicing what I preach. If I'm building this personal brand as the guy that's different, somebody should be able to check me out and see that I'm the guy that's actually different, right? Yeah. That's all part of that brand and building that up. The pandemic, yes, there's a lot more online interaction, things like that. I'm starting to leverage the networking more. And what I mean by that is when people get into networking for the first time, and I was guilty of this, it's, go on Eventbrite, find some mixers, go have some drinks at like a happy hour. And what happens? You end up mingling with some people that you know, and it's like, yeah, I've been networking, right? That's not really networking. Excuse me. A lot of networking is about asking people for what you want. And in order to ask people for what you want, you have to give people a lot of things. And what I mean by that is I refer people to businesses all the time. I refer people to contacts in my industry that are great. If I have this hyper technical IT job that I don't understand, I have 2 or 3 IT recruiters that I know very well that are great at what they do and they're local. I'll refer people to them. And then when I need somebody that's maybe a little more in their wheelhouse, I'll reach out to them and say, hey, do you know somebody? Can you give me something? So we're trading back and forth. And a lot of that's happening on LinkedIn because I'll see, hey, you're a connection of so-and-so, or hey, I noticed that you've been commenting on this. Can you make this introduction for me? It's about asking for specifically what you want, but in order to get to that point, you have to be on LinkedIn giving, whether it's just content, giving people advice, giving people referrals, whatever the case may be. So COVID has like forced me to really focus on that because I'm not out of the office. I'm not, pressing the flesh, so to speak, and shaking hands. I'm here like looking at my
pressing the flesh. I like that.
And looking at my my inbox, and it's like, all right, how do I strategically make connections? How can I connect with people when my boots aren't on the ground? So that's what COVID's definitely changed for me.
What advice would you give to people who are new in the industry? In terms of obviously you want to be doing cold calling, you want to be doing all of like the the lead generation activity and building relationships. But what advice do you give to people who are just starting out that maybe they're feeling like, man, I don't have any industry knowledge, or like I don't even know where to start, and particularly in a pandemic type atmosphere where people are getting probably even more cold calls than they've ever received, more emails, more messages. Like how are you yourself, or what advice would you give for people like just to stand out in general, and kind of cut through the noise of all the other recruiters that are probably doing very similar things?
Research. And like, I'll give you a personal example. The first job I ever got was for an accounting manager. I was like a small distribution company. Now, somebody taught me how to source. They taught me some basics on positions. They taught me, how to use our ATS. And you know what I did? I went out and I sourced, accounting recruiters are going to cringe if you watch this, but I sourced 30 controllers, which if anybody doesn't do accounting recruiting, that's a full heavy step above an accounting manager. And I cold called all 30 of them because, that was my background. I'm not afraid to cold call. I sent my emails and they laughed me out the door and hung up on me and slapped me with rejection. And there was nothing going on externally or nothing that made that happen other than I didn't actually understand what I was doing. I was calling the wrong people. And part of cutting through the noise is really understanding your job, really understanding your client, really understanding your sourcing, and reaching out to people with the right opportunity. And what I mean by that is if you're cold calling people in the middle of a pandemic like everybody else is with some mediocre lateral move to an unexciting company, of course you're not going to get anywhere. But figure out what makes that interesting to them. The funny example I use with people is, if another headhunting firm called me up and they're like, hey, Tom, I noticed you have a background in headhunting. I'm working on with this client. They're a headhunter. I'd be like, come on, man. No. But if Terry Pagula, who owns the Buffalo Bills, called me up and was like, hey, do you want to be the head coach? I'd be like, how do I take this call? It's like, understand what you're calling people about. Understand your messaging. And as a new recruiter, you're not going to get there without experience, but you can get ahead of that with really good research. find what is interesting about that client, that company, that job description, that people should be excited to take your call. And that's a weird concept, but people will be if you're calling them about the right opportunity, and you're not going to sound like you're calling them about the right opportunity without doing research. That's a really long rant, but
no, man, it's spot on. And I think, a part of that's going back to the training up front, because a lot of times we're just training people in the process of recruiting, and then we forget about like the industry research and like caring about the industry and understanding how the industry works, and then understanding, okay, is this position, or consulting the client and saying, okay, if you've been looking for somebody for 9 months, it could be an issue. There could be some sort of issue with either the types of people that you're targeting, or salary, so many different issues that could come up. And I think so often our default is to go, okay, we'll pick up a job order because they're desperate anyway. We'll throw as many resumes as we can, hope that one will stick, and then that's it. And we never go back and just say, hey, let's actually just take a look at the role, for example. Like, are we going after too higher level people? Like, is this seen as a lateral move? Is there actually an issue with your image in the marketplace? This is something else that's a deeper issue. And I think unless you go to that point, you remain a recruiter. And as soon as you start going deeper, you start becoming more of a consultant. You start becoming an asset to that organization. And I think we were talking about this before the call as well. It's being able to, the answer isn't always, I just need to bring in more job orders, and I just need to be able to bring in 10 more job orders, 20 more job orders. It's taking the current job orders you have right now and figuring out a way to increase the percentage of those that you're filling. And that likely is to do with what you're talking about, which is the research up front. It's knowing things. So I'm curious, like, how do you, obviously there's conversations, but like, how do you do that research up front? I mean, and like, how do you get involved in kind of learning within a specific industry that you're working in? Like, how do you do that yourself?
Yeah, so I mean, the internet can teach you anything, which is great. I mean, Google away, right? Until you're comfortable with something. I worked with a great engineering recruiter. It's like he could take any company and overnight the next day tell you exactly how every little bit and piece worked. And that's part of it. But two, I think as recruiters, we often do the disservice on the intake call. And what I mean is, like, you're saying, and the intake call, it's like, all right, well, what's your job description? What are your must-haves? What's the pay range? Are you offering relocation? It's like, okay, those are the details that technically we need in order to start the search for this job. But that didn't give me any leverage.
No.
And it's like one of my favorite questions to ask people is, all right, and I'll paint the picture for them. I'll be like, keep in mind you're hiring me because I'm going to tap into talent. I'm going to be reaching out to people and I'm going to say, hey, I know that you're doing XYZ or your history is XYZ, but I have this great opportunity for you. And this is why, and I want you to consider it. And I ask clients all the time, I go, as a prospective candidate, let's say I'm gainfully employed. Why do I want to work for you? And some people can rattle off answers. They're like, oh my gosh, we have unlimited PTO, we've had 200% growth, and it's all these great things that you can pitch a candidate. And other people, they just stop and they're like, well, I don't know. And it's like, well, come back to me when you have that answer. Because you need to understand that I need to go out and I need to pitch your job. And if you can't give me anything to push that, I'm gonna fail. Let's just set the expectation correctly. So we're failing to ask those questions and actually figure out, like, what's exciting about this company. And don't get me wrong, you could be a boring on the surface company and find great things. If you're talking to the hiring manager, maybe it's the department. And they're like, we have this great family group, like, we're just super tight knit, two of the people here have been here forever, half my team is so tenured, they've been here for 20 plus years. That's exciting for certain candidates, but we're not even asking those questions. We're just getting job description, pay range, and the boring things. So the recruiter, and especially if it's a split desk, the salesperson's just handing over basically a job description with some details, and the recruiter's already starting at a loss. They can research all they want, but they don't have that hook, like that. Hey, here's an amazing opportunity, and this is why it's actually amazing. Yeah. They're completely missing that part of the process, and a lot of that has to do with training.
Yeah, honestly, to be honest, I think part of the problem is now too, I look at books about culture, which is like culture is just super buzzwordy. So when I worked in recruiting, what I would hear all the time is, it was like
excellent culture.
and it would be like, well, we promote people we promote people who are doing really well. I'm like, that's not like, I hope you would promote people that are doing well. Like,
Right.
That's not great. And
that
then
seems basic.
it was like work hard, play hard culture. That was another one I'd hear. And I think what's happened is like somebody came along and they were like some kind of culture consultant, and they said, okay, you need to have a good culture. And so then people start like, everything gets buzzwordy. And I think a lot of it is really, like you said, it's being able to dig deep and ask those right questions to get some of like the real intangibles. And so like I spoke to someone a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying that they like just did exactly what you're talking about, and they found that like everybody enjoyed this like certain video game. All right, and it was like they were all like really big gamers, and they loved this game. And so he went out and found like people who like would share that same passion for a game. And obviously like that can maybe bring up other issues with like diversity and like discrimination and that type of stuff. But I think at the heart of it, it's like, basically he just realized like, if you didn't like this video game, like you were probably going to hate working there because they're like obsessed with this video game. And I think it's figuring out like you said, you should really just be emailing like the job description, the pay, like all of like the history of the company. Like, dude, that stuff does not matter. You should not be talking on the call. It should literally be like, what is it? Like, what are the actual reasons that you think somebody would want to come and work? So I think that's huge. What about, and we talked about this before too, before the call, what about the ability to say no? What about the ability to get in one of those intake calls and just figure out like, okay, this client is not going to be a great client to work with, and I actually don't want to work with them. Like, and you mentioned you struggle with this at times. Like, how do you get to the point where you're picking the companies that you want to work for? Like, how do you get?
That's experience. Like, I really don't feel like I was even comfortable with it till probably 3 years in. And it's a combination of things. I think you have to work on orders and fail at them, and then go back and say, why did I fail? Was it pay range? Was it just not a great company to work for? Was it they're just looking for impossible skills, whatever the case? And don't get me wrong, like headhunters, we're there to find purple unicorns. So I very rarely am the guy that says, oh, it's something in your job description, you're being too picky. That's not it. It's usually some combination of other factors. Like, hey, you guys have a really bad reputation. And part of like getting to that point where you would turn down a client is you have to give them that opportunity to like bend a little bit and work with you. And it's like, and part of that is coming from this place of I have this expertise, like, hear me out. You want me to do this. I don't think I can do that. And this is why. But if you can fix these things, I think I can help you. But in order to confidently say that, you have to have the experience, and you have to be able to come at them with the expertise, and they have to see you as, I use this term a lot, but it's kind of cliche. They have to see you as a talent acquisition partner, not a resume peddler. They have to hear like, this is the advice. Like, this is why I think I will fail if we started off this way.
100%.
And if you don't want to bend, it's like, okay, well, maybe we're not a fit for each other. And in the back of your mind, you usually think, well, it's like, well, they're not gonna succeed with somebody else. But the only way to get there is with experience. I feel like that's recruiting 4.0, right? Like it takes some time to be able to like really qualify job orders and have those tough conversations with clients and really look at somebody and say, look, I don't think this is a fit for the two of us. Let me set the expectations correctly with you. But yeah, probably easily 3 years, I would say, before I was truly comfortable doing that.
And now you say no to business all the time. No, I'm just kidding. It's a tough thing. And we got Gulam just says hi, and then Anthony. Do you know Anthony?
I don't.
Man, you got to
follow up with you after this one, Anthony. I'm meeting all these great people through Joel.
He's a great guy. He does like IT or software. I should know what he does, but I'm failing at it miserably. But I know what matters even more. He's a great guy.
There you go. It's important.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've realized too, even in just going kind of independently, and I've kind of made a shift now, obviously, to helping recruitment companies with their marketing, with their content, and building up things slow, wanting to build up some relationships kind of slower, and not necessarily getting any like huge agreements and contracts up front without getting to know them. And I think, within recruiting, I think that it's a huge hurdle, like you said, recruiting 4.0. But I honestly think we could get better at training people to sniff out bad job orders. And I don't think any job order is bad. I think it's just if you don't have a relationship, and you can't build that relationship and that trust and put that client's mind at ease where they know that you're going to send them quality candidates through, it's a lose-lose. But I think we shoot ourselves in the foot a lot, because this is the classic strategy of all recruiters. They think time kills every deal, which it can, but they're not thinking that time actually heals every relationship, and it builds relationships. So what I mean by that is, like, you get a job order. What's the first thing you do? I'm going to find 10 candidates right away and send them over. And the problem is that all 10 of those candidates aren't a good fit, and maybe the best one is like a 60% fit. Right away, what you've lost is credibility, and then it's really hard to build a solid relationship. Whereas you'd probably be better just saying, hey, look, if you're looking to, maybe you've already got some candidates in play. I might not be the best person to fill this specific role, but let's talk about future roles. Let's talk about your upcoming pipeline, and start caring about their actual business as opposed to just filling that role. I think that's a start. So I'm kind of curious how you, when you bring people on board and you're teaching them this, like, do you believe that or I guess how do you kind of get people to that point? Like, are you throwing people in right away as 360 recruiters, or are you like, you're going to source first, and like how do you onboard people in a smooth way like that?
I mean, they just need constant mentorship. Like, I don't think that, and if you think of it this way, I don't think there's any training program that anybody can come up with that's so beautiful. It's like you come out of this in 6 weeks and you are a stellar recruiter. Like, if somebody has that out there, please prove me wrong. But I don't think it's there. I think it's you need a really good mentor. In my case, it's like anybody I've ever trained, it's like I'm not going away. Bounce every question off me. Let's look at every job order, and I'm not micromanaging. Like, I want to help you. And that was the difference that I found that pushed me through my career, is I ended up having to find somebody and be like, hey, just teach me your ways. Be my sounding board even. Hey, I have this job order, I have this client, I have this target. Like, what do I do with this? Because far too often, especially in the big box firms, people go through training and then they're just thrown on this island. And it's like, oh, if you have any questions, ask me. Newsflash, people won't ask questions. And nobody's like proactively really sitting with them and trying to help them, and just time after time and investing all that energy in them. Because frankly, there's so many people in this industry that churn out after a year. It's like, why not even just invest so much time and effort into them in 1 year? Because we all know the value of a great recruiter at year 2 and year 3. How many great recruiters are there with 2 or 3 years of experience? But look at a firm, and how many people do they lose after the first year? And a lot of that is nobody's holding. I know people hate this term, but like holding their hand. You need that in recruitment. This is difficult. This takes time. There is no like 90-day ramp up to start getting commission checks and be super happy. No, it takes time to really be successful. And in order to do that, you need great mentors. The best recruiting firms, that's the owner, that's whoever they select as leadership, who are really putting time and energy into their people long term. But what we do in this industry where we fail is we put that time and energy into the first 3 weeks, then let them run. And you're just like, don't worry about it. Hit these KPIs, make all these calls a day, hit all these emails a day. 6 months down the road, you're like, oh, well, what are you doing wrong? Let me help you now. No, like, invest that now.
Well, and I think, like, even with, like, the KPIs and the calls, like, I think if you're recording those, that's great. But if you're not actually, like, looking at the data and saying, okay, hey, like, Tony, you executed 90 calls, and these are results. If you're not breaking it down and actually analyzing it to then help people, I think what happens is people get in those environments and they hate the KPIs, because the KPIs become your enemy when you're not doing well, and when you're doing well and you actually understand them, they're a great way to get better. But again, it's like I think sometimes there's a disconnect between that. So we're using KPIs and numbers to make people feel bad when they're not getting the results, instead of actually taking it back and going, okay, hey, this is how and why we use these numbers to get better. And I think, to your point, man, spot on. It's that training. I mean, I've seen it where you train somebody for 6 weeks and then boom, you're on the floor, you make a call. And you know, I know it's one of the things that like I found really, you know, kind of surprising and saddening really in our industry, because we're like going to clients and we're saying, hey, we can recruit top talent for you. And there's a lot of people that do, but then it's like, as a recruitment agency, it's like, as an industry, we suck at recruiting people into recruitment. And I think there's a lot of people that get bitter, then they go to the corporate side, or they just give up on recruiting altogether. And I'm like, with our level of success after that first year, it's so low, and it's shocking. And the problem is it's costs a lot of money. It makes a lot of assumptions, and it just shows, honestly, that it just perpetuates like everything we're talking about right from the get-go. Like, it's not helping with the reputation of the industry as a whole. So yeah, man, I'd love to hear, like, I mean, what's kind of your, I don't want to say like your goals from like even like a professional level necessarily, but like what would be like your goal as far as like helping out the industry, and like obviously helping people who are working for you and helping grow your own agency is part of that. But like, what's like the bigger picture for that? Or like, how do you see yourself helping the industry as a whole to change with these things? Because I think you got some awesome insights there.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, and this kind of does tie into the professional goals, like I want to build my team to a point where I can step back and focus a little more on that. Like, right, like, how do I change our image? How do I, you know, I don't want to say influencer because we always tie that to social media, but like, I want to be an influencer in the space. You know, I want HR directors to understand that, you know, I'm somebody you can call for advice, a job order, whatever. And in order to get there, it's a combination of things. I need to surround myself with awesome people. I need to invest a ton of time into them. You know, make sure that they're comfortable and they want to do recruiting. And getting to that point where I can step back and say, okay, well, now I can focus on this a little more. Now I can really worry about image, and not that I'm letting that go, but I imagine if I had 10 more hours a week to do that, what I could do. So that's kind of,
you just hire me to do that, you know.
I'll just hire Joel. I mean, you know, like, we could do that. But I don't want to miss your earlier point though, when we were talking about like hiring people. We're so bad at recruiting recruiters, and a lot of that is if you talk to, and I'm sure somebody's going through this right now, it's like you talk to a recruiting firm and it's like, all right, you know, this is what we look for. We love sports players. We love, you know, people with hustle and drive and outside sales experience. And it's like, we look for all these things and we just put it in their mind that it's like, all right, in order to be a recruiter, like, kiss your family goodbye, work 90 hours a week, hustle. Don't worry, you'll be successful in 2 months and you'll make money hand over fist, right? It's like uncapped commissions. Don't worry, you were the captain of the football team. You're going to be great at this. And it's like, no. And it only works like with that, with how, what? I don't know, 10% of people, like the amount of people we churn year one. And it's like every firm seems to hire the same profile of people. And it doesn't, and I'm not saying those people can't be successful in these careers, because it is a lot about hustle and it's a lot about drive, but it's not about working 90 hours a week and saying goodbye to your family. And hustle doesn't fix everything else. I want to know who's adaptive. I want to know who's just resilient. I want to know who has a genuine interest in people.
100%.
There's a new one. Why don't we ask about that? You know? And it's like, if we start changing the way as agencies, like, we're hiring people and getting people into our firms and attracting them to it, and stop saying like, look, if you can make 80 cold calls a day, like, you're going to be a good fit. Let me hire you. Like, start really digging in and look. It's like, okay, you know, do you have the tools? If I train you, if I teach you, like, are you going to be receptive to that? Like, are you going to stick through this with me? Do you have a genuine interest in being successful in this above and beyond like, oh, I'm going to crush your KPIs because, you know, I play sports? I don't know. I don't get the hiring profile. And I think that's what we need to change if we're going to stop churning out recruiters in year one.
Man, I I know you mentioned, I think you mentioned this earlier too, but on Friday I had Bert Miller over at MRI, and yeah, man, it was cool hearing how he like breaks down his own firm, and like how, one of the things he said was like focus on your strengths, and I again, like you mentioned, that engineer recruiter. Like I love engineering recruiters because they, like my experience with engineering recruiters is like they'll tell you that before you start making calls and sourcing people, like they'll just figure out like what it is they do, and like look, and they're like genuinely passionate about the product or whatever the company is that they're working with. And so I'm one of my first experience working with an engineering search was I worked with a company that did hydraulic lifts, and I got super, I don't know, I just got super excited about the search, and I started searching people who were design engineers, and I came up with like all these design engineers that like were designing like small components. And this guy was like, dude, do you even know like what you're searching on? I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, we're talking about like big old hydraulic lifts. So you need to be actually looking at the companies that you're sourcing from. Like, do they manufacture big, big equipment, or hydraulics have to be in there as well. And I was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. Like I need to hire someone that like would, number one, have the experience, but they'd be passionate about these similar types of things. And I think that was super early on in my career, to where in recruiting, to where it like made sense. I was like, okay, I need to actually conceptualize what people are doing. I then went into construction, and it was a very similar thing. It's like, you can find a project manager that builds, single family homes, or you can find a project manager that does $30 million buildings, or you can find a project manager that does roads and bridges. And 99% of the time it's really hard to like transition people. And the guy that's building roads doesn't want to build buildings. But it wasn't until like someone sat me down and he's like, look, this is why and how to do it. And I was fortunate enough to grow up in a world where it wasn't contingent, so they allowed for that training. But yeah, I think when we create these worlds where it's everybody for themselves, it's so hard to incentivize people to actually put the training in. And then people would say, well, why don't you compensate a manager then on the overall performance of a team? But even that, I just don't think is enough, because you have to find people who aren't just a manager because they're the top performer, but they're a manager because they care about people. So everything you're saying, spot on, man. I love that. One of the things I like to do just with wrapping up here, because I know we're coming up to about 50 minutes, is number one, where can we find you? Like, what's the best place for people to connect with you? And then number two, I just like to just end it with like, what advice would you give to somebody who is just starting their career, and particularly as it relates to the pandemic and like just dealing with the anxieties of that? Like, what advice would you give to someone like that? So why don't you just start off with where we can find you?
Yeah, so I live on this platform, right? You can find me chasing Joel around, basically.
You are in every live show. I have to give you that.
I'm on every live show. It's on around the lunch hour. It's like, all right, this gives me an excuse. Like, I'm going to eat the sandwich. I'm going to you on the second screen. So find me chasing Joel around. No, find me here on LinkedIn.
How do you keep the lunch down while like my face is there?
Sometimes you're just so funny. It's really hard because it's like, my this screen over here is like covered in tomato soup from Friday's live show. It was just spitting.
Nice.
So, no, find me here on LinkedIn. You can find us on our company website. It's sswny.com. My email's on there. My phone's on there. Call me, email me, whatever. If there's a reason to get in touch. And on that note, like, the best advice I can give somebody is surround yourself with good people. It's kind of like find that mentor. And if that person's not in your firm, reach out to me. Reach out to Joel. Joel, you've been great about this. Joel and I first connected because I was just firing him some stuff. Next thing you know, we had some similar passions. We were talking about building businesses. Find those people in the middle of the pandemic. Find out what's working. There's great recruiters out there. I shout some out all the time. While we're technically competitors, I'd like to surround myself with good people in this industry. I got people coast to coast, honestly. Ben Sheffield in Atlanta, amazing guy. I got some people out in roster. I got people everywhere. So go out on LinkedIn, whatever. If there's something that you're scared about, if you need to honestly just message somebody and say like, hey, I'm super burnt out and I don't think I'm going to be good at this. Like, you've been doing this for a while. What do you think? Like, as recruiters, the good ones, we genuinely want to help people. Message me. I'll answer you in a heartbeat. So
are you hiring anyone for your team right now?
Not right now. Probably, hopefully first quarter. So
sweet.
New York's weird. We're about to get to this point where we say nobody can, like, every non-essential business is going to shut down for a little while. So might go dark for a period of time. Sorry.
I was talking to a bunch of guys in the UK, and they're all on lockdown over there. So, but man, it's super great advice, and I would echo that. Anyone who is, kind of early on in their career, or even a couple of years in, if you're feeling like you're dealing with stuff right now, reach out to Tom. I know when we talked, it was a way different conversation than I was expecting. Just because you kind of get a mixed bag of conversations on LinkedIn. But as soon as we spoke, like, you gave me advice on my business, you gave me advice on how to grow, and obviously you had people come onto this live stream and shout you out. So it's a big testament to who you are. As we close here too, Anthony said I work in cloud, so he works in the cloud. So that's where I was going.
Joel completely got that wrong.
Yeah, I did, man. It's bad. I should know that, but yeah, man, I appreciate it, and I love it that you're involved in LinkedIn. Hopefully, you're able to put out more and more content, more and more video too. I'd love to see that, and appreciate your time, and appreciate you coming on the show.
My pleasure, man.
All right, let me end this.
Every day.
Every day, let's do it.